August 1943. Sicily. General George Patton has just won one of the most spectacular campaigns of the war, capturing Palermo and racing to Messina in a display of audacious leadership that made the Germans fear him above all other Allied commanders. But in 2 evacuation hospitals, Patton has done something that could end his career. He struck 2 soldiers suffering from combat fatigue, calling them cowards and ordering them back to the front. Word has reached Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower. The press corps knows. Congress will know soon, and when they do, they will demand Patton's head. In Washington, Army Chief of Staff George Catlett Marshall faces an impossible choice. Public opinion will be savage. Politicians will call for courts-martial. But Marshall knows something the public does not. America is about to launch the largest amphibious invasion in history, and the Germans are waiting. Without Patton, thousands of American soldiers may die unnecessarily. Marshall must decide whether one general's brilliance outweighs his catastrophic lack of judgment. The future of the war hangs in the balance. George Catlett. Marshall did not make decisions based on emotion. As Chief of Staff of the United States Army, he had built the largest military force in American history from virtually nothing, transforming an army that ranked 17th in the world in 1939 into a juggernaut capable of fighting on multiple continents simultaneously. He selected commanders based on competence, not sentiment. He had already relieved dozens of generals who failed to meet his standards. Personal friendship meant nothing when American lives were at stake. But Patton was different. Marshall had known him for decades, had watched him develop from a brash young officer who charged into Mexico with Pershing to hunt Pancho Villa into one of the most tactically brilliant commanders America had ever produced. More importantly, Marshall understood what many others did not. Patton possessed a rare combination of qualities that could not be taught and could not be replicated. He understood mobile warfare at an instinctive level that his peers struggled to grasp even with careful study. The Sicily campaign had proven this beyond any doubt. While British forces under Montgomery ground forward slowly against determined German resistance, Patton's 7th Army had exploded across the island. He took Palermo in a lightning strike that caught the Germans completely off guard, then pivoted and raced Montgomery to Messina, capturing the city first and cutting off the German retreat. His 90,000 men had moved with a speed and coordination that military theorists had thought impossible in modern warfare. The Germans noticed. Intelligence reports indicated that German commanders now considered Patton the most dangerous Allied general in the theater. They feared him in a way they feared no other American officer. When they planned defensive positions, they planned for Patton. When they allocated their best units, they positioned them where they thought Patton might strike. This psychological advantage was worth divisions. But now, in 2 separate incidents 1 week apart, Patton had sabotaged himself. On August 3rd, at the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia, he encountered Private Charles Kuhl, who appeared unwounded. When Kuhl explained he could not take the combat stress, Patton erupted. He slapped the soldier with his gloves and physically ejected him from the hospital tent. 7 days later, at the 93rd Evacuation Hospital, Patton repeated the performance with Private Paul Bennett, this time drawing his pistol and threatening to shoot the man for cowardice. The incidents revealed everything wrong with Patton's command philosophy. He genuinely did not believe in combat fatigue as a medical condition. To him, it represented weakness that infected other soldiers and undermined combat effectiveness. His own experience in World War I, where he had been wounded and returned to action, convinced him that willpower alone separated warriors from cowards. He could not comprehend that the human mind had limits just as the body did. Eisenhower learned of the incidents from medical officers who filed formal reports. The Supreme Commander was furious. He sent Patton a scathing letter on August 17th that questioned his judgment, self-discipline, and fitness to command. But critically, Eisenhower did not relieve him. Instead, he ordered Patton to apologize personally to the soldiers, to the medical staff who witnessed the incidents, and to every division under his command. It was a calculated humiliation designed to punish Patton while keeping him available for future operations. The apologies were torture for Patton. Standing before thousands of soldiers, admitting he had been wrong, violated everything in his nature. But he did it because he understood the alternative was the end of his career. What he did not know was that the press corps had learned everything and was sitting on the story at Eisenhower's request. That silence would not last forever. On November 21, 1943, radio commentator Drew Pearson shattered the silence. During his Sunday evening broadcast, Pearson revealed that Lieutenant General George Patton had struck a shell-shocked soldier in a Sicilian hospital, calling it an act of brutality by a high-ranking officer against a defenseless enlisted man. The reaction was immediate and savage. Newspaper editorial pages across America exploded with condemnation. The Washington Post called Patton's actions despicable and questioned his fitness to lead. Congressman after congressman rose to denounce him. Representative Jed Johnson of Oklahoma labeled the incident disgraceful. Representative Charles Hoven of Iowa, himself a combat veteran, declared that tyrants like Patton had no place in the American Army. Even some military figures joined the criticism. Retired General John Pershing, Patton's own mentor from World War I, publicly condemned his former protégé's behavior. The political pressure on Secretary of War Henry Stimson became intense. The Senate demanded explanations. Why had Patton not been court-martialed? Why was he still in uniform? Stimson found himself defending a general who had committed acts that, under military law, could constitute assault. The War Department's carefully cultivated relationship with Congress was being damaged by one man's inability to control his temper. In his office at the Pentagon, Marshall read the intelligence reports and the press clippings with growing concern. The public fury was even worse than anticipated, but Marshall's attention was focused on something the American public could not know: the German response. Through signals intelligence and interrogation of captured officers, Allied intelligence had learned that the Germans considered Patton's apparent disgrace to be genuine. They believed the slapping incidents had ended his frontline career. Some German commanders were actually relieved, thinking they would no longer face America's most aggressive general. This gave Marshall an idea. But first, he had to ensure Patton survived the political firestorm. Stimson needed ammunition to defend the War Department's decision to retain Patton, and Marshall had to provide it. The Chief of Staff understood that he was not just defending one general. He was defending a strategic asset that could not be replaced. Marshall consulted with Stimson and Assistant Secretary of War John McCloy. Together, they crafted a response that would frame the issue in stark military terms. Stimson wrote to the Senate, and his letter contained language that Marshall had carefully reviewed. The Secretary stated that Patton must be retained because of the need for his aggressive, winning leadership in the bitter battles yet to come before final victory. It was a direct appeal to military necessity over political convenience. The letter continued with an assessment that reflected Marshall's strategic thinking. Patton was the only available Army commander with actual experience fighting Field Marshal Rommel and conducting extensive amphibious landing operations, followed by rapid campaigns of exploitation. This was not hyperbole. Every other senior American commander lacked either the combat experience against first-rate German forces or the demonstrated ability to conduct the kind of mobile warfare that would be essential in France. Marshall also addressed Eisenhower directly through official channels. His message was calculated and revealing. He told Eisenhower he had been considering the matter on a purely business basis. The effect on Eisenhower's command, on troop confidence, and on public faith in the War Department had to be weighed against one unmistakable fact. Patton was the only available commander for certain assignments who possessed the necessary combat experience and tactical brilliance. The phrase purely business basis was quintessentially Marshall. He was not defending Patton because of friendship or loyalty. He was making a cold calculation about winning the war. Sentiment had no place in the equation. Marshall knew that the invasion of France would require commanders who could break through prepared defenses and exploit the breakthrough before the Germans could stabilize their lines. Patton had proven he could do this. No other American general had demonstrated the same capability at the same scale. But Marshall also sent a clear message through back channels. Patton was on his last chance. One more incident, one more public embarrassment, and not even Marshall would be able to save him. The political crisis created an unexpected opportunity. Eisenhower was planning Operation Overlord, the cross-channel invasion of France, scheduled for spring 1944. The invasion's success depended partly on convincing the Germans that the attack would come at Pas-de-Calais, rather than Normandy. For this deception to work, the Allies needed the Germans to believe a massive army group was assembling in southeastern England, poised to strike across the narrowest part of the Channel. The Phantom Force was designated the First United States Army Group, and it needed a commander whom the Germans would find credible. It had to be someone with a reputation for aggressive action, someone the Germans would expect to lead the main invasion force. Despite his apparent disgrace, or perhaps because of it, Patton was the obvious choice. The Germans knew his name and feared his abilities. If intelligence indicated Patton was commanding Fusag, German planners would assume that was where the real invasion would strike. Marshall understood the psychological warfare dimension immediately. The slapping incidents, which had nearly destroyed Patton's career, could actually enhance the deception. German intelligence services had learned about the incidents through press coverage and Allied communications that were deliberately allowed to leak. They interpreted Patton's assignment to Fusag as a face-saving gesture, a way to keep him in uniform without giving him actual combat command. This made the deception more believable. Throughout late 1943 and early 1944, Patton played his role in the greatest con game of the war. He made highly visible trips throughout England, inspecting the phantom Fusag units that existed only as inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and simulated radio traffic. German reconnaissance aircraft photographed the fake installations. German signals intelligence intercepted the false communications, and German military intelligence concluded that the main invasion force was exactly where Allied planners wanted them to believe it was. The deception held even after D-Day. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6th, German commanders hesitated to commit their strategic reserves because they believed the Normandy landings were a feint. They kept the 15th Army at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for Patton's assault that would never come. This gave the Allied forces critical time to establish their beachheads and begin the breakout operations. But Patton was desperate for combat command. 7 weeks after D-Day, with Allied forces still grinding through the Norman hedgerows, Marshall and Eisenhower finally unleashed him. On August 1, 1944, Patton's Third Army became operational in France. The impact was immediate and dramatic. While other American and British forces had been struggling to advance a few miles at enormous cost, Patton's forces exploded through the German lines and raced across France. Within weeks, Patton's Third Army covered more than 400 miles. His forces moved so fast that traditional command and control broke down. Staff officers flew ahead in light aircraft to deliver orders personally because radio communications could not keep up with the pace of advance. German units that had held stubbornly against other Allied commanders simply melted away before Patton's onslaught. He captured more territory and destroyed more German formations in 6 weeks than other Allied forces had accomplished in 6 months. Marshall watched this performance with satisfaction. His calculation had been correct. Retaining Patton, despite the controversy, protecting him through the political storm, and then positioning him where his talents could be fully employed, had proven to be the right decision from a purely military standpoint. The Third Army's rampage across France vindicated everything Marshall had argued about Patton's indispensability. But Marshall also knew that Patton's personality flaws had not disappeared. The general's inability to control his public statements would create another crisis within months, one that would again threaten his career and again require Marshall's intervention. The question was whether Patton's battlefield brilliance would continue to outweigh his catastrophic lack of judgment in everything else. In April 1944, before Patton took command of the Third Army in combat, he nearly destroyed himself again. Speaking at the opening of a welcome club for American soldiers in Knutsford, England, Patton made remarks that ignited another firestorm. He stated that it was the evident destiny of the British and Americans to rule the post-war world. The comment, reported in newspapers, created an immediate diplomatic incident. The problem was timing and context. The Soviet Union was bearing the brunt of the fighting against Germany on the Eastern Front, suffering millions of casualties while the Western Allies prepared for the Normandy invasion. Patton's comment seemed to exclude the Soviets from any post-war leadership role, a direct insult to America's most important ally. The political implications were severe. Worse, Patton had been specifically warned about making public statements. After the slapping incidents, both Eisenhower and Marshall had made clear that Patton needed to exercise restraint in his public comments. This new controversy demonstrated that Patton either could not or would not learn that lesson. It raised fundamental questions about whether he could be trusted in high command, where a general's words carried strategic weight. Secretary Stimson was forced to publicly denounce Patton's comments as personal opinion, not United States policy. The Army had to defend its recent promotion of Patton to temporary lieutenant general rank in the face of renewed congressional criticism. Editorial pages that had just begun to forgive the slapping incidents erupted again with calls for Patton's removal. Eisenhower seriously considered relief this time. He sent a message to Marshall that revealed his frustration. Eisenhower wrote that Patton was unable to use reasonably good sense in matters where senior commanders must appreciate the effect of their own actions upon public opinion, and this raised doubts about the wisdom of retaining him in high command. The Supreme Commander was deferring final action until he heard from Marshall. Marshall's response was carefully crafted. He noted that he had been considering the matter on a purely business basis, the same phrase he had used during the slapping incident crisis. Then Marshall made his calculation explicit. The effect on Eisenhower, the troops, and public confidence had to be opposed to the unmistakable fact that Patton was the only available Army commander for his present assignment who had actual experience fighting Rommel and conducting extensive landing operations, followed by rapid campaigns of exploitation. The message was clear. Marshall was telling Eisenhower to retain Patton because the military situation required it. Personal feelings, public relations concerns, and political pressure were secondary to operational necessity. Marshall was not excusing Patton's behavior. He was making a command decision based on what he believed would save American lives and win the war faster. Eisenhower took Marshall's guidance and kept Patton in command, but sent him a final warning. The letter told Patton officially and definitely that if he was guilty of any further indiscretion in speech or action that caused embarrassment for the War Department or Allied headquarters, Eisenhower would relieve him instantly from command. There would be no third chance. Patton accepted the warning, but the incident revealed the fundamental tension in Marshall's calculation. By protecting Patton repeatedly, Marshall was enabling behavior that created strategic risks of its own. What if Patton's next outburst damaged Allied unity at a critical moment? What if his lack of discipline undermined cooperation between American, British, and Soviet forces? These were not hypothetical concerns. They were real dangers that Marshall had to weigh against Patton's battlefield effectiveness. Yet Marshall continued to believe that the battlefield effectiveness outweighed the risks. The German military clearly believed Patton was the most dangerous Allied commander. That psychological advantage, Marshall judged, was worth the political headaches. But the headaches were about to give way to something far more important. Proof that Marshall's calculation had been correct. December 19th, 1944. Eisenhower convened an emergency meeting at Verdun, France. The situation was desperate. 3 days earlier, German forces had smashed through weak American positions in the Ardennes forest, launching Hitler's last major offensive in the West. The surprise attack had created a dangerous bulge in Allied lines and threatened to split American and British forces. At the critical Belgian crossroads town of Bastogne, the surrounded 101st Airborne Division was running out of ammunition and medical supplies. If Bastogne fell, the German breakthrough could reach the Meuse River and potentially drive all the way to Antwerp, cutting off entire Allied armies. The mood in the meeting room was grim. Eisenhower tried to maintain optimism, asking for cheerful faces as commanders discussed how to respond to the German assault. Patton, never one for false optimism, offered his characteristic blunt assessment. Then he made a promise that stunned everyone present. He could attack north to relieve Bastogne within 48 hours. The other commanders thought it was impossible. Patton's Third Army was heavily engaged along the Saar River, more than 100 miles south of Bastogne. Turning an entire army 90 degrees and attacking in the opposite direction would require disengaging from current operations, moving hundreds of thousands of men and vehicles through winter conditions, and coordinating the attack across a completely different sector of front. Military theorists considered such a maneuver to take weeks of planning and preparation. Patton was promising to do it in 2 days, but Patton had been reading intelligence reports since early November. He suspected a German offensive was coming and had ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans. When the crisis broke, he was ready. Leaving the Verdun conference, Patton phoned his headquarters and uttered 2 words: "Play ball." This code phrase initiated the prearranged operational orders that set the Third Army in motion. What followed was one of the most remarkable military movements in American history. Patton disengaged 6 full divisions from combat, pivoted them 90 degrees, and sent them racing north through snow and ice toward Bastogne. Within days, more than 133,000 vehicles had been rerouted, covering an average distance of over 11 miles per vehicle. Support echelons carried 62,000 tons of supplies to sustain the offensive. On December 26th, lead elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through German lines and reached Bastogne, ending the siege. The relief of Bastogne became one of the most celebrated achievements of the European war. More importantly, it marked the beginning of the end for the German offensive. With Bastogne secure and Patton's forces driving into the southern flank of the Bulge, German commanders knew their attack had failed. In Washington, Marshall watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. Every decision he had made regarding Patton, every political battle he had fought to keep him in command, was validated by the relief of Bastogne. The maneuver demonstrated everything Marshall had argued about Patton's unique abilities. No other American commander could have executed that operation with the same speed and coordination. The Germans had escaped destruction at Falaise partly because Patton had been held back. At Bastogne, he was given his head, and the results spoke for themselves. Marshall understood what many critics did not. Commanding armies in modern warfare required different skill sets. Bradley was an excellent strategic coordinator, methodical and reliable. Montgomery was careful and thorough. But Patton possessed something neither of them had, an instinctive grasp of mobile warfare that allowed him to seize opportunities other commanders could not even perceive. This was not just about aggression or boldness. It was about understanding how armored formations moved, how logistics functioned under pressure, and how to maintain momentum when conventional wisdom said forces needed to pause and consolidate. The relief of Bastogne justified everything Marshall had said about needing Patton's aggressive, winning leadership. In the crucial battles before final victory, Patton had proven indispensable, but Marshall also knew that war magnified both strengths and weaknesses. Patton's brilliance in combat operations was matched by his catastrophic lack of judgment in everything else. Managing that contradiction had required Marshall to override political pressure, defend controversial decisions, and maintain focus on what he called the purely business basis of winning the war. History would debate whether Marshall made the right call. What was not debatable was the result. American forces defeated Germany in Europe, with Patton playing a crucial role in that victory, and Marshall's strategic calculation had made that possible.